When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Deb Flashenberg, and I'm your host of Yoga Birth Babies. And today we have a community birth story. It's actually 2 stories in one, because my guest, Laura Moore, shares about her first pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And she's very open that it was challenging. And she even talks about being traumatic. And the reason I want her to share her first story is because her processing that trauma and her experience really fed into how she approached her second pregnancy in a very different way. So we have Laura sharing about her first pregnancy, the thoughts and ways she wanted to make different changes for her second, how she picked a new provider, how she really prioritized her mental health, and how she processed the trauma of her first pregnancy in order to be ready to dive into her second pregnancy and birth. And her second pregnancy and birth, it's a really beautiful story, and no spoiler alert here, but she had a cesarean, a planned cesarean. Well, it wasn't planned. It was, if she could have a VBAC, she would, but she chose to have a cesarean. And what I love about her story is that she puts it in a really positive light, because so many people look at a cesarean like, oh, you had a cesarean, but it can be an empowered choice. And when you feel good about your choice and you have the support, it can be a beautiful birth experience. And I'm really happy that Laura shared that, and how calm it was, and how accepting everyone was of her and her choice for that. Because the first time, she didn't always feel that people were calm or accepting of her choices. So I'm really excited for you to hear Laura's 2 birth stories. Before we get to that, let me just tell you a little bit about Laura, my guest. So Laura Moore is an assistant principal and former math teacher in the New York City Department of Education. Even though she grew up in Texas, she feels more at home in New York, having lived there for the last 14 years. She's been practicing yoga since 2018, and she lives in Harlem with her husband, Hal, her 3.5-year-old daughter, Lucy, and her newborn son, Hunter. And it was really wonderful because Laura has been part of PYC for both her pregnancies, and she shared that the first one was during COVID, so we only saw each other through the screen, little small boxes of Zoom. And it was really great having her walk in when she was pregnant and postpartum in person. And she does share about how community has really made such a difference in her mental health this time around. So I'm excited for you to hear that. So just a few updates about what's happening at PYC. As I always say, really the best way to check out our online classes, our in-person classes, our workshops, our on-demand workshops, everything's on our website. So I'd say go there, prenatalyogacenter.com, check out when you want to take class, because we do have classes 7 days a week. So I'm sure if you want a time, we've got it for you, as well as our on-demand classes. You can also find our blogs there. I've been doing blogs for the studio is going to be 23 this summer, which is bonkers. And I think I've been doing blogs for probably 17 or 18 years. So there's a few to choose from, as well as our old podcasts you can listen to. So everything's on the website, including our teacher training. So take a look at all of that. And then I always put it out to you that if you think you'd be a great guest for the podcast, or maybe you have a guest that you want to recommend, check out our website. There is a spot where it says YBB episodes, Yoga Birth Baby episodes, where there's an application, because I would love for you to apply to be on the podcast. I'm always looking for interesting stories and perspectives on things about pregnancy, birth, yoga, and parenting. So if that's you, let me know. And then the request I have for you, our community, is please leave a rating and review about the podcast. It helps people find us. All right, we're going to take a super quick break. When we come back, please enjoy Laura's birth stories.
This episode is brought to you by Walmart. New beauty is in bloom at Walmart, and it's all about springtime radiance. From Drybar, Tula Skincare, and hundreds more available online, Walmart has the premium brands you want and this season's on-trend products for flawless, glossy hair and hydrated skin. Big name beauty brands? Check. The things you love? Check. Find trending spring beauty and all you need to look and feel gorgeous at Walmart, on app and online.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you, Deb?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to hear your birth story. I mean, I saw you yesterday at postnatal, and I've seen you for the last few weeks, but I haven't really got to dive in. So I'm so excited. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. I'm excited to share it. I know that immediately postpartum, the first time, sharing my story was something that definitely helped me process. So I'm happy to share with you, and maybe it'll help some other people process too.
Oh, wonderful. All right. So before we get into, because this is going to be kind of a story of both your births and how the first one influenced choices for the second. But before we get into that, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself?
I am a native Texan. So I grew up in Texas, and then pretty much as soon as I could left. My family is still there, but I've been in New York for 14 or 15 years. I am an assistant principal in the New York City Department of Education, the public schools. And before doing that, I was a math teacher for 10 years. So I've been doing yoga since 2018. So who knows how long that is? 7 years, 6 years? I don't know. I was a math teacher, but can't do that math. And I live in Harlem with my husband, who's also a teacher, and our two kids, Lucy and Hunter.
Oh, so excited to hear your story. And I do not hear any bit of a Texas accent.
That is a point of pride. My mother grew up in suburban Illinois, and my dad is from Arkansas, and my mom made sure that we had no Southern drawl.
Yeah, when you said Texas, I've heard you say that in the studio before. I'm like, really? I would have never thought. I mean, I'm from Boston. I don't think I have any sort of Boston accent. Well,
you do not. I went to college in Boston, but you do not have any.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Tufts.
I had many friends. I grew up in Andover, so it wasn't right in Boston. But I had several friends that went to Tufts. I went to school in Boston itself, and it's such a fun college town.
It is.
All right, so let's get to hearing a little bit about. So I think in order to understand your choices that you made for your second birth, I think we should start hearing a little bit about your first pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So I'm just going to give you the mic and the floor and go for it.
All right. So my daughter Lucy, was born in August of 2021. So very much in the midst of the pandemic. And so, my husband and I had started talking about maybe having kids at the start of the pandemic. And then my gynecologist was like, slow down. Like, we don't know what's going on. Like, hold off. And I thought, like, okay, that's a very reasonable thing to do with epigenetics, not knowing how it was going to affect anything. So we held off. I got pregnant in December of 2020. So before vaccines, before anything. And I had been with the same gynecologist for many years who I really liked. She was like this spunky, hyper woman who told me exactly what she thought, which was very comforting for me. And there were two OBs in the practice. I'll just call them Dr. V and Dr. S because I don't want anyone to,
Got it.
And my gynecologist said, I think you'll really connect with Dr. V. Like, I think she'll get you. I'm not sure Dr. S is like your type of person. So I was like, okay. So I tried to make as many appointments with Dr. V as possible. But, occasionally I had to make an appointment with Dr. S. And in meeting with both of them, I found that Dr. V was like very attuned to anxiety and my anxiety, and was like, thought it was more important that I was of sound mind and was very calm and like listened to me whenever I was feeling anxious. And Dr. S was like very by the book. And she's a very competent doctor, but it was, not necessarily respecting my choices or previous conversations. So a little background information. I have been on anxiety and depression medication since I was in high school, taking Lexapro, Wellbutrin. And before I started to get, my husband, I thought about getting pregnant, I was like obsessed with getting off the medication because all I had been told was like, you can't take antidepressants when you're pregnant. And my psychiatrist was like, well, actually you can. And so I met with a specialist and talked about the pros and cons. And we decided to like get off of one of the medications and stay on the other. So I got off the Lexapro and stayed on the Wellbutrin to minimize exposures. Part of that decision meant I couldn't breastfeed, which was fine with me. It was something that was healthy, like fine for the baby in utero, but had an increased risk of seizures with breastfeeding. So I thought, okay, like breastfeeding is not as important to me as my mental health. So I'm going to do that. And early on in my my pregnancy appointments, Dr. V was like, okay, sounds good. And Dr. S was like, well, I really think you should consider the benefits of breastfeeding. And she brought it up multiple appointments. And I said, like, I'm not going to do this because I want to take this medication. And she's like, well, I'll do some research. And I said, I talked about this with my psychiatrist of 10 years. I met with a reproductive psychiatrist specialist, and we all decided to make this decision. And she was like, well, there's a lot of health benefits. And I said, I know that. But so she didn't respect that choice and kind of gave me a hard time about it. But I know that that's something that's by the book. I will say I was at NYU the first time, which is a baby-friendly hospital. And that baby friendliness, part of that stamp is, supporting breastfeeding, supporting baby in room, all of those things, which are great, but didn't necessarily align with what my needs were. And I remember later in the pregnancy, Dr. S had kind of expressed some concern about how much weight I was gaining. I was pretty thin beforehand and had only gained like 35 pounds, which was on the up end of recommended, but she was kind of like, I think you should kind of slow down with how much you're eating. And I was like, I'm eating when I'm hungry and I'm stopping when I'm full. I'm not like, this is what my body is asking for. And so with every decision, it kind of felt like she was questioning it. And I don't think it was out of not respecting me. I think she was pushing like what is considered best guidance, but not necessarily taking my story into effect. And the other doctor, Dr. V, was much more attuned to that. So as I was getting more, cooking further and further along, we're in the summer of 2021. And my husband was supposed to go to his best friend's wedding in Pennsylvania. And that wedding was August 14th. And so I remember talking with my therapist, with my doctor.
And when was your due date?
August 25th.
Oh, okay.
So it was close. So my sister was going to come mommy sit me. So she flew in just to be with me in case something would happen. And I was like, there's no way anything's going to happen, but like she'll come in. And then my mom had been in town helping me set up everything the week prior. And she left the night of August 12th because she was superstitious and didn't want to fly on August 13th. It was a Friday the 13th. So I was like, okay. So she left. She felt kind of weird about it, but she was like, I should just go. So I said, okay. My husband was supposed to stay, was supposed to go to this wedding. And I had my 38-week appointment the morning of August 13th. So I took the subway in downtown to get to my appointment. And Dr. S was like, you took the subway here? I said, yeah, I'm a New Yorker. How else am I supposed to get around? She's like, you're 9 months pregnant. I said, well, it's New York. Come on. And my blood pressure was a bit high, but I had noticed that during all of our appointments, my blood pressure was slightly elevated. It was higher with Dr. S than Dr. V. But it was high enough that she said, like, you need to go to the hospital for blood pressure monitoring. And I said, no, my husband needs to go to this wedding and my sister's going to be here in an hour. And she was like, no, you need to go to the hospital. So I kind of reluctantly went to the hospital. And you know what happens when you try to tell yourself lower your blood pressure?
Yeah.
It spikes. So my husband was like, okay, he sent his friend to the wedding ahead of time. He was like, maybe I'll join tomorrow. And so I went to the hospital, and my sister arrived and was like, I'm going to be so pissed if I come there and I don't get to see you. And she said this before anything had happened. And I said, well, if it happens, it's out of my control. So she arrives and she lands and she's like, I'm here. And I said, I'm at the hospital. So we went to the hospital, and they monitored my blood pressure for 4 hours. And I was doing everything I could, meditating, trying to breathe to keep my blood pressure low. And it didn't work because I really wanted my husband to be able to go to his best friend's wedding. And I remember even telling my therapist a few weeks prior, like, this baby can come August 16th or after. I don't care, but I want my husband to have this, last weekend. And so they monitor my blood pressure. And after 4 hours of taking my blood pressure every 15 minutes, they said, we're going to admit you and induce you, because I had too many spikes above the recommended number. I had tested negative for preeclampsia, but they said, like, your blood pressure's high enough. Like, this is considered gestational hypertension. Like, we're going to induce you. So I was really excited. And my husband came and to the hospital and brought way too much stuff because we didn't know, like, that it was going to be multiple days. And my sister was at home, like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, I came here for no reason. So she helped kind of set up the nursery with my mother-in-law and kind of decorate a little bit. So I had known somewhat I had read Emily Oster's book, Expecting Better, and knew a little bit about the induction process. So they inserted the pill to thin my cervix, or whatever. That's maybe not the technical right language.
It's the same idea. Yeah.
Okay. And so my husband and I were watching Mayor of Easttown, eating our salads, waiting for my cervix to efface. So we did that for 5 hours, and I delayed the epidural because I had read that an epidural slows down birth, and the anesthesiologist was like, okay, but like, this is gonna be a long night. So they put in the pill for the effacement. 5 hours later, they come check. I'm 50%, which is like not an ideal result given, they would hope it would be further along. So at 2 a.m, so they put the pill in at 7. At 2 a.m, they came in to put in the Foley balloon, which I had heard was painful, but I still hadn't had the epidural yet. And I did all my yoga breaths that I had learned. I believe I did the blowing out the candle was the one that was best for me. And did the yoga breaths. And they were like, wow, like, this is really impressive. Like, how did you, handle this? Most people experience pain. And I was like, yoga breathing. Like, okay. So then they put in the balloon and started the Pitocin and upped the Pitocin drip. And after a couple of hours, an hour or two, it was, the contractions were strong enough that I was like, I want to be able to sleep because I know I'm not going to be able to sleep. So I got the epidural in the middle of the night, and maybe got like 2 hours of sleep. And they came in, they kept checking and kept looking at it. And I was, nowhere. I was moving slowly. So in the morning, the nurse came in around 9 and said, like, it's going to be a long day. You can have a bagel. And I was like, oh boy, like, if you're letting me eat solid food, after I started the drip and whatnot, like, this is gonna be a long day. So my sister came to the hospital to visit and, kind of hang out, and it was restricted because of COVID, but they let her come. So we sat and we watched movies and we hung out, and they had the Pitocin on like the max level for a long time. And I was getting nowhere fast. And so they were checking and whatnot, and 2 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters, and I'm hours into the process. And I remember at 12 hours, I think, is the max you can have the balloon in. They came to remove the balloon, and I think I was at like 3 centimeters, maybe. So they removed the balloon. We're still sitting there. This was the COVID times when people were doing Zoom weddings, so we actually turned the wedding on, and we're watching a friend's wedding in Pennsylvania from the hospital room. And they broke my water in hopes that would get things moving along faster. So I'll never remember, like, they broke the water, and then my husband shouted Mazel Tov because it was a Jewish wedding, and they had like shattered the
the glass, yeah.
And after all this time, they were like, okay, we're hoping this will make it go faster. That was around 5 p.m. on Saturday. I had barely slept. I had slept maybe 2 hours since 8 a.m. the day before. So I was running on very little sleep. They were turning the Pitocin up all the way and trying to get things going. And after 24 hours on Pitocin, they said, like, this is too long. Like, you could hemorrhage. Like, we need to have a C-section. And that was around, 1 a.m., I guess. So I had been asleep. I had been awake for a long time. They had been trying medical interventions for over 24 hours. I was exhausted. I was trying to will my body, my, cervix to open. It was not getting anywhere. And I got to about 4.5 centimeters after about 30 hours of them trying to get it to go. So Lucy was not wanting to come out. I was exhausted. I was scared. I was crying. And they took me down to the operating room for the C-section. And I didn't want to have a C. I was open to whatever they suggested medically, but I wanted to do as few medical interventions as necessary, but was willing to do whatever was needed. Mm-hmm. And it turned out everything was needed. And so they took me down to the operating room, and I remember like crying. It was cold. I felt like everything was happening around me so quickly. I didn't know what was going on. Like, nothing was really explained to me. It felt like this orchestration, and I'll never remember. They kept like saying, Alice, Alice. And I was crying. I was like, who's Alice? My name is Laura. And they were like, sweetie, Alice is the name of a tool that we're using to pinch your stomach. And I was like, okay. And I was like, but I can still feel it. And they're like, no, you can't. You would be screaming if you could hear that, if you could really feel this. So I felt like everything was happening without me really understanding what was going on. And I think it was because at that point it was like a medical emergency and needed to get Lucy out. And so they're doing the C-section, everything's going along. I'm crying and they're like, can you please stop crying? I'm like, no. And I had a mask on because it was COVID. And my husband and this other nurse were like stroking my face and holding my hand to try to get me to calm down. And I think that the OB was someone I had not seen before. I wasn't familiar with. And well, actually I was, but that's adding a whole nother wrinkle. I had like a headache aneurysm scare earlier in my pregnancy, but that's another story. I didn't have an aneurysm. So, she's like, your abs are like, do you do a lot of yoga? And I was like, yeah, why? She said, your abs are really strong. We're having a hard time getting the baby out. I was like, well, thank you. But also like, get it out. Like, I'm done with this. So Lucy was born at 3:18. They like handed her to me and I was like, please take her away. Like, give her to my husband. I was exhausted. I was scared I was going to drop her. I was just terrified and was crying. So I held her for like 2 seconds and then passed her right off because I was overwhelmed. They took me to the recovery room. I thought we were there for like an hour and a half, but apparently we were there for 5 hours. Oh, wow. And they kept asking, what pain I was in and whatnot. And I was so out of it. But by the end, I have pictures of me from that time. And normally there's like a glowing mother. And I always joke that I looked like a melted popsicle, just like not a full person. Like, I didn't look happy. I was, in pain and exhausted. And I remember in a moment of clarity, like seeing someone come in for a scheduled C-section and they looked bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and looked at me and was like, oh my God, what happened? So that was a big ordeal. And I felt like things weren't explained to me, but I think it was because it was a medical emergency. I felt like everything was happening around me. My body was not ready for this baby to come out and was doing everything to keep it in. And so it was a lot. And again, this was also during COVID. So we had a shared room. So I finally moved up to the mother baby unit and I had a shared room and I had changed roommates twice. And every time someone came in, they kept asking like, so how, like, are you breastfeeding? How's breastfeeding going? And I said like, I'm not breastfeeding. And everyone would say, why? And like, instead of just saying, okay, they would ask me why. And I felt like I was asked about breastfeeding like every hour or two. And it made me feel like my decision wasn't respected. But I don't think it was personal. Looking back now, I think it was just part of the routine and weren't listening. Like, I wanted to put a sign on the door, like, do not ask me about breastfeeding. I'm not doing it and the baby will be fine. Like, leave me alone. But it felt like a personal attack, even though I think they were just doing their jobs. So they kept testing me for preeclampsia. I had floaters in my vision, and it was negative. So I had lost like more blood than normal, not like a crazy amount, but more than recommended. So the doctor, who I had never met before, said, like, we're going to give you magnesium drip because you say you have these floaters and this headache. And the nurse just kind of looked at me like, okay. And my sister-in-law had preeclampsia and had said, like, the magnesium drip is going to make you feel awful. Like, see if there's other things you can do first. If you're not, if your enzymes in your urine or whatever are not there, like, ask if there's something else to do. And I asked the nurse, and she said, it is going to make you feel terrible. You don't have to do it. There are other things you can do first. They're just trying to cover their bases, but I'm not going to go against the doctor's recommendation. So I asked the doctor, is there something else I can do before the magnesium drip? And she said, well, we can do a blood transfusion. So I did a blood transfusion, and it turns out I was just like severely anemic. So after the blood transfusion, everything was fine. I didn't have to do the magnesium drip, and it felt like, my sister-in-law encouraging me to advocate for my health, the nurse being supportive of, like, you don't have to do these things, especially knowing this was a doctor I had literally never met. And so it felt like, okay, I don't have to do this. So I went home a couple days later. We missed the wedding. My sister was here. It was, come and gone. We came home, and like, we're just kind of like, okay, I guess now what do we do? And things have been fine. But anytime someone would ask me about giving birth, I would like immediately start crying for like weeks and months afterwards. Like, I couldn't get through the story without crying. And I don't know if it was because I had felt like I didn't have control. I don't know if I was scared. I don't know if like everything went opposite of what I wanted, but I just couldn't go through without crying. And it was a very overwhelming time. And, I at the time before my pregnancy, I had been a teacher. And after my maternity leave, I was going to go back as an assistant principal. So I was transitioning roles. And as a result of that, I only got 7.5 weeks of maternity leave because I switched unions, and unions is where they did the paid parental leave. Mm-hmm. And I felt like my leave, a lot of people I worked with, there weren't a lot of parents. So my leave wasn't really respected. People were texting and emailing me all the time, asking me questions. And so I felt like anxious to get back to work because I wanted this new job. It was, so I like kind of hustled back a little bit faster than I think I would have liked to. It was a tough postpartum journey. I was in a very toxic work environment, and without going into it, I had I was working at what was considered a very good public school in the city. But there was a lot of like administrative dysfunction. There was a lot of turnover in the role ahead of time. My peers weren't necessarily supportive, and I was pretty miserable in the job. And I looking back now can see I was pretty under medicated, and I thought like, well, I stayed on the Wellbutrin, like that's enough. But I ended up losing a ton of weight over the course of that year. I felt super anxious all the time. I wasn't supported at work, and I had ended up losing a ton of weight to the point where I like weighed what I did when I graduated from high school, which was not good, just from stress, from the baby, from work and everything. And just had like an absolute breakdown at work one day, and was, sobbing, crying. I called my psychiatrist, who was like, let's get you back on Lexapro. Here's a Klonopin to help you kind of calm down and reset and refocus. And I think, without going too much into the work situation, I think the combination of being under-medicated, being postpartum, being in an environment that was not necessarily supportive of being postpartum, and also like fighting for this job that I felt like I deserved but wasn't necessarily being supported in, I was like, a shell of myself. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking for other jobs, and it was just like, I feel like I had to put myself back together again a little bit. And the first step of that was getting on the appropriate medication. And I remember in April, that year, someone had high blood pressure at work, and I was like, who was pregnant? And I was like, go to the nurse, take your blood pressure. Like, she had been seeing floaters. And I kind of told her everything that was going to happen at an induction. And she joked that I was like Liam Neeson in Taken, of like, you're going to get taken and this is what's going to happen. This is what you should do. But I realized that I had no idea like what I had never heard of someone who had a birth story like me, like a failed induction. I had only heard, positive birth stories or inductions that worked or whatnot. But after I had given birth and talking with friends, I had several friends who had failed inductions who had resulted in C-sections, but no one had shared their story. And so I felt like part of how I manage my anxiety is even bad information is better than no information. So like, I didn't know what could happen. And found out after the fact that I had several friends who had experienced something very similar. So
I'm glad you're sharing your story about that. Yeah, so let's talk about what are some of the changes you made with your second pregnancy? Because I know that you wanted a different provider, and let's throw into there, what were you looking for in a different provider this time?
Yes. So I actually called back to the NYU practice just to see, and I wasn't thrilled about it, but the doctor that I really liked, Dr. V, left the practice and is now working in a private practice focusing on like a holistic medicine and mental health. And I was like, of course she is. And then the rest of the practice I originally went back to, everyone but the doctor that I didn't like had left. So they had in the 2.5 years of experience, complete turnover except for Dr. S. And no one could see me until I was like 12.5 weeks. And I was like, this is not going to work for me. I need to see someone, I want to see someone earlier. So with all those signs of NYU not working, I thought like, okay. And so I asked several friends, like what practice they had been to, like what their experience was. And over again, friends from work, sibling, the parents or the moms of my daughter's classmates had all recommended this Weill Cornell on the West Side. Just the practice in general, and who I actually think are the two that you have, Dr. Bradley and Dr. Nabizadeh, are the two that you list as recommended from PYC. Mm-hmm. And so I just felt like all these signs kept pointing me to this practice. They had availability. I had numerous friends who said they felt really supported. So I was just looking for someone who I connected with, who was respectful of my choices and also, didn't make me anxious. And so I had this first meeting with Dr. Nabizadeh, and I felt like we clicked immediately. Like, she made jokes. She was a bit irreverent. But she also told me exactly what I needed to hear, but was, she kind of reminded me of myself, a little bit all over the place, but very knowledgeable, very professional and very direct. And we just clicked really well, and she was positive and moved kind of like a bee around the room. And I just felt like a good personal connection. Mm-hmm. And when she had asked, I knew your new practice, what happened? And I told her it had a bad first experience. I don't think it was necessarily the doctor's fault. And she said, listen, I get it. I've had patients who've had miscarriages under my care that had nothing to do with me. But when they wanted a new doctor, I couldn't blame them because they just wanted a totally new experience. So I get it. You're not saying anything negative about the other doctor. You just want something new and fresh, which I thought showed she's not an understanding of the more global situation. Yeah. I think, so I was just looking for a more personal connection of someone who respected my choices. And I got that there. I'm
glad to hear that. It sounds like she was and I know her, she's a fantastic doctor. All right, we need to take a quick break. But when we come back, let's talk a little bit about how you're prioritizing your mental health for this second pregnancy, as well as processing the trauma from your last, because I know going into a new pregnancy with some trauma in the back can be a lot. So we'll take a break, and that's what we'll jump into when we get back. We'll be right back.
That's your money saying it's time for a McDonald's run. Because with new McValue at McDonald's, you get more than you expect. Like, buy a 6-piece McNuggets and add a McChicken for just $1. Your money says let's go. Get more than you expect with new McValue. Prices and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Spring is here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Okay, we are back. So I know there was some trauma from your first birth, and I know you were focused on a new provider. So how did you prioritize your mental health heading into your second pregnancy, as well as process the trauma from your first? Because it sounds like it took a lot to move through it, but then I bet it probably came up as you were heading into another birth experience.
Yes. So I think a lot of the trauma of my first birth was also wrapped up in the trauma of this very toxic work environment, where I had worked for 10 years and things turned sour, and they were like very tightly wrapped. And it's kind of hard to see the difference between the two of them, because I was postpartum and also in this very difficult work situation. And so I left that school, and found another job where I was working, and was kind of spent a year kind of recovering, piecing my work self back together. I had gotten back on the Lexapro, like a very tiny baby dose, but it was enough to make me feel like stable, where I wasn't feeling panicky. I wasn't feeling, exhausted. I just felt like, like chemically speaking, I was kind of more under control. I had been in therapy before and then continued to process both the birth and the work situation. And it was basically like a very bad breakup, and where I was being gaslit and whatnot. So processing that. And I started a new job as an assistant principal where I am now. And my work life was so different that I didn't have this kind of panic in the background. I felt appreciated at work. I felt understood. People saw me as someone who brought something positive to the situation. So like being appreciated at work was a big part of this. Because I felt like, I love working. I that question of like, if someone gave you $1 million tomorrow, like, what would you do? And I was like, just take a better vacation, but go back to work. So I love my work as an educator. And so I think being in a more safe working environment where people understood me, appreciated me, and I was happy to go every day, made a big difference, to the point where we even felt like we could talk about having kids again, because I felt safe there. A big difference is there was a lot more parents at my new school. At my former job, there was not a lot of parents. None of the administrators had kids. And there were some people who were parents, but their kids were fully grown. And there were a handful of young parents, but not many. And it was kind of notorious of like, at a baby shower at my former job, the principal said, like, no one else have a baby. It's too hard to find leave replacements.
Jeez.
Yeah. So at my new position, my principal didn't have kids, but she was like, she was so happy for me. She's like, congratulations. All the other assistant principals all had young kids. There was many other parents, like many other staff had kids, and everyone, instead of being like annoyed about having to find a leave replacement, was super encouraging and supportive and happy for me, which I didn't experience the first time. So like really being in a happier work environment decreased a substantial amount of the stress that I was experiencing beforehand. I think finding a provider that respected my choices. You said, Dr. Vizida, she's wonderful. She's like a kooky lady. And I joked that like with my husband, I wanted to have a third child so I could keep seeing her. And he was like, no.
It's like, just send her a card every now and then. That's enough.
Yeah. No, you cannot. So anyway, I think all of those things, having that supportive environment, I didn't feel guilty about going to appointments. Everyone at work was like, stop trying to carry heavy stuff. Like, you can still do things. You don't need to be superwoman. So I think just being in a safe place, both at home and at work, made the pregnancy go so much smoother.
And your nervous system, when you think about feeling safe, your nervous system is going to be in a more grounded place. So let's hear about baby number 2, because I know that you felt really good about this story. So let's hear that story.
So Hunter I had met with Dr. Nabizadeh multiple times. We had talked about, do you want to do an induction? Do you want to do a C-section? And kind of talked about the pros and cons. And she listened to what my concerns were. And, I said, I'm not against doing an induction, but I don't want to go through another failed induction that ends up in a C-section because I went through all of this trauma and just ended up in the same place anyway. I said, but I'm happy to try a VBAC if it's appropriate. Like if my body is ready for this baby, I'm happy to, and like progressing naturally on its own, I'm happy to try a VBAC. But if an induction is necessary, I'm not doing it. I'm going straight to C-section. And she just said, I can't tell you what to do. Like, I feel like a superwoman whenever I do a VBAC, but like, you weren't breached. Like, you had a failed induction beforehand. Like, it doesn't seem like you're the best candidate, but we'll try it if you want to. So I appreciated her telling me what it was, but also being open to my choices. So it was December, 16th, 17th. People kept asking me at work, and I was due January 9th. And people kept asking me oh, are you ready? And I said, no, we're just trying to get through this week. We'll get through we'll get through December 20th, and then we'll prepare for the baby. Because we were just trying to wait until school was done. I was trying to wrap up my formal observations. I had observations I had to write. I had a whole bunch of transition meetings set up to try to pass things off. And I remember on December 17th feeling like I had super bad indigestion where I couldn't eat anything. I had a bowl of cereal and that was it for the day because everything else made me feel really uncomfortable. We had the staff work party that night, our holiday party the night of the 17th. I went to the party, was chatting with people. They said, how are you feeling? Are you ready? I'm like, no, we're not even close to being ready. We don't have a dresser. We haven't ordered anything. We're just trying to get through this week at work, tie up all of our loose ends. And then December 21st, we'll start getting it together because that's when the school break was. Well, I should have learned my lesson from my first pregnancy because as soon as I said that, my water broke at 2 a.m. On the 18th. Of course it did. I woke up at 2 a.m. on the 18th and I was like, I don't think I peed the bed because I had already woken up at least once or twice to go to the bathroom. And I was like, I don't think this is urine. So I kind of tried to figure out what's going on. I called the hotline and they said I went through the questions of, do you think it, what does it smell? Is it clear? Do you see the baby? I was like, no, I don't see the baby. But then I thought maybe it's just urine. And then I'm standing there and start dripping again. And I'm like, nope, not urine. Definitely water broke. So I went out and that night, the previous night, my husband had ordered the dresser. I had put some stuff in my Amazon cart. So I guess maybe I jinxed myself. And my husband had fallen asleep on the couch listening to a podcast. So I walked out at 2 a.m. and was like, we need to go to the hospital. He was like, what? What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm like, no, my water broke. I think it's showtime. He was like, okay. We hadn't packed a bag. We hadn't done anything. But I was so much calmer. I think, again, my nervous system was just I was so much calmer and was kind of excited. So I was like, I told him, get in the shower because I don't know when you're going to shower again. I packed a bag. I ate a snack because I was hungry. I hadn't eaten anything the day before. So I had a banana and some mango because I was starving. And we called my mother-in-law because my daughter Lucy was asleep. So that was another factor we hadn't really considered. So I'm very lucky that my mother-in-law lives very close. I always joke that it's the perfect situation. We get along very well. I love her very much. And we're very lucky to have her support. But I joke that it's perfect because she lives close enough that she could be at her house in 10 minutes in an emergency, but far enough away that we'd never run into each other on the street. So it's a good separation where we can see her whenever we want, but not too often. And she respects our boundaries and she's wonderful. So we called her at 2:30 and she was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? So she got in a cab and came over and we went to the hospital and we got there. My blood pressure's a bit high, but the nurses who are, taking me in were very calm and oh, it's, it's a bit high, but probably because your water broke and you're excited and all this stuff is happening. So, it was just a much calmer situation. So they took me back, my husband and I back to a room. I'm dripping all over the place and I keep apologizing. And they're like, it happens literally all the time. You're they're not the first or last person this hour to drip on the floor. It's okay. So we're in there waiting. They get me in a gown and I'm just in the triage room. and they kind of come in and ask, oh, when did you eat? What are you doing? And they're like, okay, let's do an exam. So they do an exam and they're like, you're 0% effaced and your baby is not even in your pelvis. I was like, well, okay. So they said, like, we could do an induction or a C-section. And I just said, I want to do a C-section. I don't want to do an induction. And they just said, okay. And I think because it wasn't an emergency and because I had eaten something, I had to wait like 6 hours before they could take me back because of anesthesia. As a result of that, I was able to, like, with like a crazy person, cancel all my work meetings on my phone, call people, tell them, like, you know, send text messages. And I was joking with my husband. I sent the assistant principal I worked the most with is another man, and he's got 3 kids and was, you know, super supportive and my closest work friend. And I sent him a "you up" text message at 4 a.m. And my husband was like, oh my gosh, of course you did. And he was awake and said, like, yeah, everything okay? And I said, nope, it's showtime. So he told everyone at work. I got my ducks in a row. During that time, we called my parents, you know, once it was a reasonable hour. Once it was like 7, we called them. And, you know, told them what was happening. And I think because we had to have this wait, like, everyone came by and explained what was going to happen. The nurses, you know, the physician's assistant told me what was going to happen. Then someone from anesthesia came, both a resident and then the attending came and explained what was going to happen, gave me my choices, had me sign the forms. Then I met with the OB who was on duty that day from the practice, was Samantha Fader, who had actually done another friend of mine's C-section. And she came by and explained what was going to happen. And so because we had this time and it wasn't an emergency, it was calm and I understood and things were explained to me. And I felt like my decision was respected. They're like, okay, sounds good. They took me back and I was like calm and not panicking and not crying. And the room didn't feel like freezing cold. And it just was, I was, to your point about the nervous system, I was just a lot calmer. And so it was a much more pleasant experience. I was making jokes with the doctors and the nurses. And, you know, they asked if I had a playlist. I was like, no, but just like something calm. So they put on, you know, Jack Johnson. And I was like, oh, perfect millennial music. And it was just and, you know, when they pulled Hunter out, he cried. He was small, but he cried. Lucy hadn't. They had to do some resuscitation, which was also part of the panic. But like everything went so smoothly that it was almost like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop and it never dropped. And so I think just having that time and having the explanation really made a huge difference in my mood. And also having a calmer, safer pregnancy of not feeling panicked and worried about work the whole time and not feeling like I was under emotional duress every day. And so being in a healthier work environment, having a practitioner who under practice who like respected my choices and joked with me and clicked with me on a personal level, you know, it all made such a big difference. And it was, you know, just a calmer, smoother experience.
Did you stay on the Lexapro for the second pregnancy?
I did.
I bet that made a difference too. Again,
huge.
I don't know drugs. I'm going to say that out loud, but I could imagine the support of of having that. Really, yeah, I'm glad that made a difference.
It did, but I think like I had gotten off the most common thing that people who take medication do is like when it works, they're like, I don't need it anymore. They're like, well, it's because it's working. Right. And I had met with my psychiatrist and I had gotten back on it and I was on like a tiny dose and I had chatted with a friend who was a nurse practitioner but does like medication management and said like, listen, I'm not your doctor. I'm not giving you medical advice, but the advice you're going to get is the fewer exposures, the better. However, like, if this is what's making you feel stable, like, then it's fine. Like I have patients who take this all the time. And I think I had an OB tell me like, you know, Zoloft is the one to take. But I had a psychiatrist say like, well, that's what an OB or general practitioner is going to tell you because that is, you know, the pregnancy safe one or Prozac. I can't remember what it is. But my psychiatrist who knew more about that specific thing said like, it's fine. Like it's okay. And I think having that little baby dose of Lexapro, having a safe work environment, I just was like, I joke that it's
such
like having
a different mental space. It really
it's like having
way.
Bumpers when you're bowling. Yeah, is the best way that I can think about it. Like you still may have a strike, but you're not going to have a gutter ball over and over. I mean, you might still like, you know, not hit enough pins, but you're not going to go into the gutter constantly over and over again. It just kind of keeps you within a range.
That's
definitely
a really good
too.
way of describing that. So as we start to wrap up, how has postpartum been this time? I'm imagining, well, I've seen you.
Yeah.
So I know. But hearing how it was your first time sharing your story, it always brought you to tears. I've seen you for the last, I don't know, 5, 6 weeks, and you've always seemed in good spirits. Of course, I can't make a judgment from that, but how has it been this time?
I think, one thing that I will say that I didn't mention before is during the pandemic, there was very minimal in-person yoga classes. And so I remember when the first time I saw you were like, I recognize your face because it was from the Zoom when I came back. And I think being in person, like I had a routine of every Saturday morning going to the yoga class and feeling like I had a space to like meet with other people in a community of pregnant women that I didn't really have the first time because it was on the computer. And it was better than nothing, but like it wasn't the same as being in person.
Right.
So I think that also helped the lead up. And same with the post. I think I was telling my friend, like we were completely unready for Hunter's arrival. We had like nothing. We didn't have a dresser put together. Like we had to order formula. Like we did all the things. We had to order everything. But we kind of knew like it's okay. Like things aren't going to go right. And like your baby's going to be fine. And I think having that, like knowing kind of like everything is going to go wrong, but it's also going to be fine. That approach, that mentality made a big difference. So that like when Hunter was a week old, his bilirubin was kind of elevated and it was Christmas. So we had to go to the ER because the pediatrician's office was closed. I was like pretty calm because I thought like, we're in good hands. Like we have trusted people. And there's been some, we like weren't sure if we wanted to circumcise my son for a variety of reasons. We decided to do it. And I'm happy we did because the urologist noticed that he had 2 hernias. So like all these things kind of, which are apparently pretty common for premature boys when they're premature. So everything I think postpartum, I just feel like because I had a more grounded state during the pregnancy and because I knew like things are going to go wrong and also it's not the end of the world, it's been much smoother. I also know that I'm going back to a workplace that's more supportive. People have like left me alone and not asked me any questions, but have sent me lots of well wishes. And so I'm just in like, generally speaking, a happier, healthier state. And so I think I'm not sure if I could have even had a second child without getting to that like better mental place because I don't know if I could have even handled what that looked like. So really between therapy, finding a safer environment, medication, finding a community during the pregnancy. My husband was at a new job where he was feeling better. Like the ducks were kind of in a row so that when the things have gone wrong, it's like, we can take this, like we can handle it. Like it'll be okay.
And you found a great community. I know the folks right now in the postnatal yoga, everyone seems to get along and see each other. So I love seeing that. Community is so important.
It's been great.
We're going to take another break. And when we come back, what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents? Okay, we'll be right back.
Springfest deals are still in full swing at Lowe's. Right now, get 5 bags of Stay Green Premium Color 2 cubic foot mulch for only $10. And get up to 40% off select major appliances. Plus, save up to $300 when you buy 2 or more select GE kitchen appliances of $396 or more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 4/16, excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Selection varies by location while supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details and qualifying items.
Okay, we're back. So I'm really curious where we're gonna pull from because you've gone through 2 very different pregnancies. You're a mom, so I'm just gonna throw it at you. What is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents?
I think I had read that and heard, the put yourself first, like the breastfeeding, you don't have to breastfeed like a baby just needs to be fed and you don't have to do all these things. And I think with my first pregnancy, I was so worried about doing everything by the book and right that I was driving myself crazy. In addition to other things. And the second time around, I thought like, it's okay if I have Chick-fil-A. Like maybe it would be better if I had avocado toast, but it's okay if I have Chick-fil-A. And, I kind of just prioritized what my needs were in addition to taking care of the baby, but I wasn't putting the baby's needs over mine. I put my needs first. And as a result, we ended up with a healthy, happy baby. Yes, he was early, but it happens, who knows why my water broke early, but I think putting myself first and my relationship with my husband and my own happiness first is really what made Hunter's arrival, I think, smoother, and his current place here now happier, is being selfish. And it's okay to be selfish.
I really, really appreciate that, because I know so many parents, and I think I fall fault to this myself, of putting others first and then just completely depleting myself. So thank you for reminding us that if we don't put ourselves first, we're not really going to be able to support our kids and enjoy our lives. So I appreciate that. Laura, I really loved hearing your stories. I only heard them in bits and pieces. So thank you for sharing that, as well as sharing with the community that things can be rough and you found your way to the other side. And then you, in a sense, healed from that experience and had a completely different one. So thank you for sharing that.
And thank you for having me. This has been fun to share. And I hope that, hearing that an abduction can fail and you'll be okay can be helpful to other people. Because I had never heard that before. And a cesarean can be
wonderful. You had a wonderful cesarean. So thank you.
Well,
I'll see you in postnatal yoga.
I will. I got a few more weeks before I go back to work. So I'll see you a couple more times before I go back.
Sounds perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.